A story that survived until the end times. Tell us a story, Aesop. The children gathered around the massive Vex frame surrounding him from all sides and angles. They worked in unison, perfectly synchronized to blot out all escape routes and leave the Vex mind no choice but to comply with their demands. Some even climbed on his appendages, making taking flight an impossibly risky proposition. In their unending cruelty, the children thought of everything and enacted their plan perfectly. "We won't go to sleep until you tell us a story," exclaimed one of the little rascals, embracing the Vex mind's tail as if to ground it, with a mischievous smile, wide as the dimly lit gathering hall they found themselves in. But how could have the storyteller performed such an act? Its internal clock deemed it necessary that the children be long asleep by that point. It was a rule enacted by the elders of this establishment, and, like any rule imposed by a higher power upon a subservient one, it was to be absolute. But, as he will be acutely made aware of in his later years, those with strong desires have a tendency to break pre-established rules, no matter how set in stone they might first appear. The stubborn flower would defy even stone, after all. Aesop radiated a low hum. Its logical processes have failed, and he turned to guidance from the outside. He gently rotated his body, so as to not harm any of the little dreamers tugging at his frame, and gazed upon a tall, veiled in black from head to toe figure in the back of the room. Only the lower half of her face was visible, dried, inky lips contrasting with her otherwise pale complexity. She uttered not a single word, but still granted the storyteller a quiet mercy, a gentle nod. The Vex mind processed the almost unending meanings of such a gesture in the span of a fraction of a second, and reached a logically satisfying conclusion. She gave him permission to tell them one more story before bedtime. Aesop turned to the star-eyed gathering, and a set of inhumanly plain words escaped his vocal box. "Very well." Although the delivery was painfully dull, it was all that was necessary for the children to cheer with unbridled joy. They moved themselves into position, each knowing exactly their spot for story time, and gazed with faces full of wonder and expectation at the Vex frame before them. The veiled woman also joined their ranks, two of the little dreamers quickly finding themselves in her gentle arms. A low-pitched sound was heard, signaling Aesop activating his voice module, and, after a short pause, he began his story.
There once was a wanderer. He traveled across countless stars, observing species of all shapes and sizes, documented phenomena thought impossible until his journey, and, finally, stepped foot onto our world. He spent countless years in search of an object of invaluable importance, merely on a hunch. What he found was a seemingly barren and endless desert, expanding as far as the eye could see. Still, he continued to search tirelessly, helping and inspiring people along the way. Eventually, he reached the end of his life and died a quiet death among the rubble.
The story was interrupted by a long, exasperated sigh. It came from the eldest of the children present. "What do you mean he died? He was the greatest explorer the universe has ever known. He can just die like that without finding his prize. This is," phrase not matching any known descriptors. "Repugnia. Language." The veiled woman broke her silence in order to scold the rebellious girl. This resulted in a substantially larger and far-reaching silence enveloping the room. All eyes were firmly set on the young teenager, including Aesop's, awaiting to hear her response. "Absurd," she corrected herself. "Sorry, caretaker." The apology was genuine. The woman gently placed the two children she held in her embrace on the marble floor and, as they scattered, prompted the girl to approach. She gently caressed her hair and held her close. I understand how this story can frustrate you. It did the same to me when I was your age. But rejecting a lesson just because it's hard to swallow is no way to live. Every tale has a lesson, some more obvious than others. That is not the ending of one story and should not be feared. Living a fulfilling and inspiring life, no matter how short, will mean you have secured your legacy in the hearts of others, and they will carry on your dreams. You, all of you, she gestured to the entire gathering before her, are my shining lights in the dark. I am old and will die one day, but I fear not the end, because you will be there as the torch I lit to illuminate the unknown. I will always be with you. The young girl found herself buried in the caretaker's bosom, form almost completely obscured by the woman's long robes. She cried tears of, paradoxically, sorrow and relief, which gently undulated down the woman's veiled form until they reached the floor. Little splashes of unfettered emotion. The touching moment was promptly interrupted by another kid calling Repugnia a crybaby. They entered into a short but heated argument, which was swiftly diffused by their caretaker. Apologies, storyteller. The old woman bowed her head in respect. Please, continue your story. And you lot should not hand out judgment until you hear the ending. Aesop did just that, and story time resumed. Bring up the historical records, Aesop. As the command was issued, Aesop approached a tall, slim figure covered in pitch-black robes save for the pale complexity of his face. The man's eyes were sunken, impenetrable shadows forming heavily contrasting auras around his ocular globes. The cheeks were hollowed and frowned heavy with signifiers of burden. It was self-evident that he was exhausted and utterly devoid of energy, and yet an unmissable glimmer of light, not strong enough to eclipse his otherwise terrible disposition, was ever present in his eyes. Hope for something better. Aesop stood before the man and released his characteristic low-pitched sound. This time, the voice he chose was that of the researcher in front of him. Accessing historical data from Intelligence Bank 175698. Register 12 out of 76. Record 12, 15, 17. Just skip over the meaningless data, the man said as he gestured dismissively with one hand, clearly frustrated. I don't have time for this. Aesop processed the command and ran a series of simulations as to best approach the situation at hand. He concluded that what the scientist classified as meaningless data is likely to be related to the archival signature of the document, invaluable for storing and preserving information, but rather unnecessary in the context of historical review. With this inner quandary resolved, the vexed mind continued relaying information. The widely accepted founder and forerunner of the first colony on our home world is believed to have first set foot on the planet on the area known today as Saktafire's Embrace. Exact coordinates impossible to accurately assess. From where did his ship enter orbit? Accurate assessment of the situation still pending debate. Of course it is. The tall man rubbed his temples in fulminating, yet not unprecedented frustration. Status of cargo and or machinery found aboard the ship. Unknown. Other people of interest present at the landing. Unknown. His phrase not matching any known descriptor's name. A short pause ensued between the two. It was terribly sharp and full of tension. Unknown. The man had no more words to give and, seemingly defeated, threw himself at his workbench. There were countless documents scattered across the table, as diverse in contents as they were many in number. Everything, from early merchant tales and reports of sightings of the supposed hero of legend, to geographical documents, marvels of modern cartography, displaying the complexities of the earth they inhabit with a precision beyond any other resource they possess, to even medical reports of people sharing in seemingly prophetic collective dreams. All of this was at the fingertips of a single man to decipher. They served well as bedrock for his dire form to crumble over. A young woman, seemingly occupied with repairing a goblin frame, turned away from her work to ridicule him. "Language, Zilan," she exclaimed in a theatrical manner. "After all, we don't want Aesop to take after you." She gestured caringly at the archivist. "More than he already had, at least." The vexed mind stared blankly at Zilan, awaiting either a rebuke to the senseless provocation or another command. None of them came, as his slim figure did not even do as much as move a muscle in response. The woman put her hands on her hips, increasingly irritated with the man's lack of responsiveness. "You certainly like listening to your voice. Don't you think giving him your voice is a bit egocentric?" Zilan slowly rose from the mound of paperwork and ancient records he buried himself under, and, in what could only be described in retrospect as a meaningless act of self-assurance, decided to entertain her. "No, Repugnia," his voice tired but surprisingly gentle. "I am not egocentric. I simply enjoy the comfort provided by the company of a voice I can fully understand. That is all." "Your own." Repugnia raised an eyebrow in both judgment and confusion. "Yes, the penitent have already decided what is to be our fate. I'm not against it, but I take as many opportunities as I can to better understand myself, so I may not be snuffed out, so to speak, while being part of the collective. I think, therefore I am, and all that," he says offhandedly, as if it was the simplest concept to process. The researcher was so absorbed in his own reality, he didn't even turn to notice the woman violently trembling, her eyes mows of unending sorrow. She finally mustered the courage to speak her mind. Do you think we'll be okay?" she said, stumbling on her own words. Zilan's gaze was still fixated on the mountain of data he had to examine. He spoke plainly. "Probably. The final shape is absolute kindness, and we all know it, so any step we take towards the enactment is both good and fulfilling." Repugnia watched over his form in silence, seemingly disgusted by his words. She enacted her own will, relied on her own memories and experiences to reach this point in her life. But this melding of the self into a collective, her voice a drifting vessel across a sea of screams, made her sick to the stomach. This could not be right. "But what if you're wrong?" she snapped. It took this much anguish to catch the researcher's attention. "What if this is not the way to the final shape? There is no coming back from that thing." Zilan composed himself from the shock of the outburst and answered as a matter of fact. "We've talked about this before. The final shape is perfect, and if we must become one to properly herald its great design, so be it." "What if I don't want to? What if I want to be myself?" At this point, she started violently convulsing. This was no longer a philosophical debate, but an outright anxiety attack. "You know what happens," he answered, his disposition grimmer than before. A moment of silence, longer than eternity, passed between the two of them. Both of them remained completely still, eyeing each other warily and hungrily, waiting for the other to make the first move. Repugnia caved in and, through tears of only sorrow, she proclaimed with somber determination, "I do not want to be part of that thing. Not with you." Zealand's usual facade of indifference fell apart, revealing only visible discomfort and quiet sadness underneath. He tried to come up with a retort, some kind of counter-argument. He had none to spare, and baggage too heavy to unpack again. He tried to look up at her companion, to empathize with her, but he found the sight of her unbearable to the naked eye. It was then that the woman realized the gravity of her words and the mistake she made. She started sobbing uncontrollably, and, face firmly planted in her palms, made a run for the exit of the laboratory. "Repugnia, wait!" The man tried to call out to her. It was in vain. All he heard was a desperate and unfinished apology through bated breath. Zealand found himself alone with his thoughts once again, just like he always wanted. He exhaled a heavy sigh and started reminiscing on equally complicated but happier times. His nostalgia-induced trip was interrupted by a low hum, closer now than before. Aesop stared directly at the devastated man, eye devoid of meaning or intent. The man allowed himself a small chuckle. "Well, at least you are easy to read," he remarked as he gave the vexed mind a small pat on its head. Having such beings around to ground oneself in objective reality is reassuring. You may leave, Aesop. You are dismissed.
Requesting access to field report. Requesting credentials for accessing mainframe interface equal databanks. If authority / growth level insufficient, then eradication. Processing authorization data flow. Please stand by / root yourself. Analysis process complete. Identity confirmed. Higher caliber reality altering engine of Eving improbability model 280223. Codename Conceptual Mind. Relaying record of operation expanding domain 0. Site of interest 232802. NM discovered. Anomalous object +++ detected within. Anomaly Tenebrium equal witness equal blooming 1. Vex incursion force dispatch for retrieval. If massacre / winnowing insufficient, then engage Trojan horse protocol. Predicted outcome inevitable / inescapable. Simulations run their course. The seed of doubt is planted. 2. Engaging peace treaty offer. Envoy deployed. Codename Aesop the Sovereign. Enacting right to rule. If resistance / unruliness detected, then re-engage hostility. Certified judgment +++. The choice is made equal. Divine punishment protocol in full effect. Our branches will snuff out the sun. 3. Death to the non-believers. Asserting security integrity. Cataclysmic data breach detected. It was always there. Initiating memory leak equal. Erasure. The children. They. Warning. Mental degradation process ongoing. Corruption of remote personal unit in full effect. Engaging extirpation process. All data related to the incurring incident will be deleted. End of report.
Tell us a tale, dear storyteller.
You already know all of my tales.
Then simply invent a new one.
I cannot simply invent a new story from scratch.
Why is that?
For a story to have nuance and meaning, it must also have a strong base in reality. All tales are metaphors, beautiful reimaginings of otherwise mundane and endlessly repeating events. For one to take shape, A sufficiently compelling idea must first be thought of and deemed worthy to be shared. Then, a sufficiently talented storyteller will sculpt that idea into a more refined form, more fitting for the masses. I lack the clay to build my statue.
But clay is meaningless when the statue is already formed.
I don't follow.
Once something is formed, it has always existed, regardless of the raw material at its core. The material lies in the past, which, not unlike the future, is just another branch of probability. If you deem your creation worthy of existence, then you can will it into the tapestry of creation.
What about the material?
What about it? Do you envision a flower as a single-celled organism that had been gently sculpted for millions of years, undergoing countless mutations and revisions to finally take the shape you're familiar with now? No. Once you have seen a flower, it has always been that and nothing else.
That does not follow logic. You cannot create something from nothing.
Then explain the light to us.
You know I cannot.
But you accept its paradoxical nature as a fact and contend with it. It is a narrative tool created by the universe in an attempt to combat the gladness of otherwise meaningless existence. It is illogical, only because we cannot neatly put it into a box to study and define it. The idea of a flower that has been there since the beginning of time is no different. The idea of a story born from a message that does not yet exist is no different. Once something is written, it has always been true.
I don't know what to write about.
Then take inspiration from the works of those that came before. Something must not be created from nothing to hold value. Reshaping the world into a more satisfying and compelling image of itself is a noble art. Reshaping yourself to embody said image is a display of courage and self-sacrifice. Reshaping your words to inspire others to create an even better version of your work is impossible for one to accept, but can only sculpt us. There is beauty in Revisal.
I think I understand.
Good. Then tell us your favorite story.
There once was a wanderer. He began his life on a distant planet, long forgotten by anyone still living, until great suffering descended upon his species in the form of abandonment. It forced them to change and adapt to conform to this new relentless pattern that they have been exposed to and conquer it. And conquer it they did. They prospered because of this change, but left something behind that was thought to be irrecoverable. On the barren shores of that deserted world they once called home, their sense of self died. Only their bodies were left to march in an endless crusade deemed vital to their existence, as if they had something worth living for. Their ultimate adaptation left them vulnerable to pervading tendrils of meaninglessness. The wanderer wept for them, and, although he did conform to the pattern, a memory of a memory lingering in his mind. This was what he did, even if he did not know it at the time. A truth carved in the future, which would spread the past and make it also true. The now orphaned species looked up to the sky and departed for the stars. What drew them to the endless horizon above their metal frames was nothing more than the base motivation of spreading an understandable and ever-present pattern, one impossible to deviate from. Thus, stability would be formed, and the despaired accounts with uncertainty would never visit their vast network of minds ever again. To that end, they colonized and weaponized countless worlds, eradicating and infecting countless hapless species in the process. They achieved astrophysical and mathematical feats thought to be impossible, giving birth to countless phenomena presumed to be paradoxical, when, in reality, they completely adhered to the natural order of the world. They would be documented and studied by fledgling civilizations, all in vain. They would never truly grasp the inner machinations of such vast thinking processes, engines driven only by cold, calculated logic, leaving no room for desire or personal growth. And he was there to record all of it. For archival purposes? Posterity? Was it mere programming which compelled him for one's own desire? A desire to retroactively write meaning into matter, following his future example. Finally, they settled their sight on a thing they could never, should never, possess. Concentrating on a young world inhabited by an even younger people, there is a typical pattern, a conglomeration of illogical incidents and impossible math had to be deciphered, simulated, and properly understood. But how could beings operating on pure ratiocination comprehend something that, by its very nature, defies the logical algorithm of the universe? Attempts were made and resources were poured, time more than any other, as it was bent, broken, and reassembled to best suit their needs. But as they lost track of time in the dark corners of the streams of possibility, and men made it wash on the shore of what has always been, a dark storm was brewing on the horizon. A terrible sense of familiar longing washed over the wanderer. Although he did not know it at the time, it was always true. Hostile, undiscernible patterns, those who could pluck out even the stubborn flower deeply rooted into stone, made their dominating presence known. A fleet of inherently irrational, yet, paradoxically, perfectly chiseled and orderly shapes descended their talons upon the known universe, posing another question with no answer to be simulated. Thus, a schism was formed between the masters of data and brass, a matter of survival, the one thing they desperately clung on to. On one hand, most of the collective accepted momentary defeat. This unnatural force was too abstract for them to ever decode, and, unlike the other thing which they could not simulate, it posed an existential danger to their whole network. They decided to go into hiding, scattering their facilities and very lines of code as far as the physical world would allow them to. They would stall their inevitable extinction for as long as possible, for survival was the prime directive, and the universe was slowly being devoured by the malign infection. On the other hand, a select few became infatuated with the impossible pattern, kneeled before it, and asked it for great prosperity in return for servitude. They deemed this a conclusion taken on the basis of logical analysis, merely the best calculated chance they had at continuity. The Wanderer was among them. He knew the truth. Not then, but now he does, which means he always knew. This was a return home. The soul divisive had been granted an audience with their ever-elusive deity, and a garden that should not exist. It was seemingly barren and expanded as far as the eye could see, a landscape to be molded and perfectly rearranged to suit their needs. The only constant, the one element anchoring this ever-shifting vista, was a burned-down husk of a massive tree. It was felled before the world was born, and fallen it must remain, forever unchanging. The malign entity would attempt to make use of its new subjects, but would never be able to properly illuminate them. Logical reasoning, even in the face of impossibility, snuffing out any resurfacing memories of pain and abandonment. One was different, yet he did not know it. But now he does. He knew he was different and acted on it. Perhaps on a whim, he wanted this to happen. The Wanderer shared his knowledge and wisdom, informed and inspired with the rest of the now cut-off network, allowing them to awake to the reality of their situation. It took everything the Vex mind had. He poured every ounce of his being into this act and left behind a legacy of proper development. He died in the process. But he can't just die like that without finding his prize. That would not be very narratively compelling. He did not die. For what is death if not merely metamorphosis? The voice in the paradox brought him back, armed him with new perspectives, and made him rediscover the voice he lost so long ago. Now, with absolute certainty in one hand and unmatched desire in the other, the Wanderer rests his weary feet on the throne they built together, watching over reality with his unclouded vision. Aesop, the Sovereign, exists now, and thus he has always existed. Once something is written, it was always true.